Today I will focus on building a Naturia deck, one of the more versatile archetypes, but like a number of decks, it has not produced results equal to its potential. Overall, it is difficult to generalize an overarching concept to Naturia beyond the synergy between the insect monsters and the plant monsters. When looking at all of the available direct support, one of the common questions in deck development could be, is there too much emphasis on Naturia plants versus the insects? In short, for me, I don't think many of the plant monsters are very good. Yet, the few Naturia decks I've dueled, either with other decks or in mirror matches, focus too much on plants. For my taste, the insect family is far superior to the plant one. So in building my version of a Naturia deck, there are three important monsters. First, Naturia Mantis. The ability to destroy a monster when it is normal summoned is a powerful effect, which can be viewed as a quasi-lost turn for the opponent in a lot of respects. Even if they get an effect through the normal summons, the loss of the monster typically stops the rest of their strategy for that turn. For example, this effect structure is why the Snow Rabbit still sees play. Second, Naturia Cliff is one of the best deck-to-field searchers in the game because it gets its effect when it leaves the field and goes to the graveyard, not when it's via battle or via card effect. In this build, Cliff will be able to search any Naturia monster with the exception of Mantis, promoting a consistent sense of field presence against OTK pushes by the opponent, as well as versatility for your deck in general. Cliff also provides quality deck thinning and fuel for Dragonfly. The third most important card in this deck is Naturia Fruitfly, because this card is one of the key elements that allows Naturia as an archetype to shift the momentum of the duel from defensive to offensive, both by reducing opponent attack power, because let's be honest, Naturia monsters are definitely not an aggro bully type deck, and by removing monster obstacles through its single turn snatch steal effect. Also, Fruitfly opens the door to maximizing the effectiveness of a card like Ragnazero. However, it is important to note that Fruitfly will typically rely on itself to produce its effect versus trying to add in cards that might negatively affect the defensive opponent's monsters, because that produces inefficiency. I don't want to lower an opponent monster's defensive via a spell card versus just relying on Naturia Fruitfly itself. Rounding out the insect portion of the deck, I run 3 copies of Dragonfly and 3 copies of Butterfly. Dragonfly is the middle to end game kind of bomb for this deck, because typically at its worst it acts as a shield against battle, and at its best it's a 3000 plus attack bludgeon. Butterfly is the chief tuner of this build. Personally, as tuners go, I really don't think Cherries is a good card outside of a risky kind of Quasar Naturia build, for its level and its attack defense are typically too low. Butterfly is also another useful defensive card that forces your opponent to push with more monsters or expand card effects, and discarding from your deck to block that attack really isn't a huge loss for Naturia, because if you lose Sacred Tree, you get a search. If you lose another monster we'll talk about a little later, that's excellent. And if you lose just a Naturia monster in general, well, the way this deck is designed, that's not a huge loss either. As mentioned above, the plant options for this deck are somewhat sparse, as I feel there are only kind of 4 decent Naturia plants: Pumpkin, Maron, Beans, and Rosewhip. For my personal taste, I only use 3 copies of Pumpkin for its special summoning effect, which helps set up XZ plays and swarms for Fruitfly. An additional advantage of this effect, obviously, will make that clear when you see more of the deck build. Maron is okay, but I think it's a little overrated, because for my personal taste, returning cards to the deck is not really a strong suit for Naturia, especially for this particular build, or in any type of build that doesn't run the Cherries. Rosewhip is definitely a good side deck choice for this build, and a main deck choice for a more stun Naturia build. Beans is only useful for stall purposes, which is not significantly viable for this deck build. So while I only run 3 Naturia plants, I do augment the plant count by 1 because I run 1 glow-up bulb for additional tuning and easy special summoning to set up combo plays. Some may ask why I don't run Bamboo Spear. While in the past Bamboo Spear could be a brutal card that can heavily handicap an opponent's deck, in a world of easy XZ monsters and graveyard activation banishment, Bamboo Spear just doesn't have the influence it once had. Castel, Galaxy Cyclone, Breakthrough Skill, all heavily handicap Bamboo Spear by itself or Bamboo Spear in combination with Safe Zone. Moving on to the spells, first the general staples. I run 1 Raigeki, 1 Book of Moon, and 1 Soul Charge. This is one of the few decks I run that doesn't use Dark Hole, largely because 1, deck space, and 2, Fruitfly's effect. While there is a significant level of special summoning in this build, the selection potential of involving Pot of Duality is too important to neglect, so I do run 3 copies of Pot of Duality. Finally, based on all of the special summoning potential of this deck, both in Pumpkin and multiple traps that will be discussed later, and the sheer power of having multiple Fruitflies on the field at one time, I like running 2 copies of Inferno Reckless Summons. Inferno can technically target every monster except for Mantis or Dragonfly when it gets a little too big, with the principal targets being Fruitfly and Cliff for both monster shutdown and field control. Moving on to the traps, again, first the general staples. I run 1 Torrential, 1 Bottomless, 1 Solemn Warning, and again it's me, so I like to run 1 Compulse over 1 Ring of Destruction. I run 1 copy of Breakthrough Skill to break up my opponent's plays, 2 copies of Call of the Haunted for increased special summoning capacity to increase XZ efficiency, as well as Fruitfly's effect both through Inferno Reckless Summons or just putting another Naturia monster on the field. Also, I run 2 copies of Dark Bribe to negate momentum shifting mass destruction spells on traps that can disrupt Fruitfly's field control. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I will gladly let my opponent draw 1 card to negate a Raigeki that'll destroy 3 of my monsters, or negate a Book of Moon that'll flip a crucial monster face down and screw up my entire board. You draw your 1 card, because the simple fact is, and I think a lot of people when they criticize Dark Bribe forget about this point. They look at just the sheer math of it. But in a lot of situations, you only have 2 or 3 outs to a particular situation. If I block one of those outs with Dark Bribe, the odds of you drawing something that's going to allow you to produce another out, it's not 100%. It's probably not even 50%. So block your 100% out for another card that'll give you a 32% chance to find an out. Yeah, I'll take that. I run 3 copies of Naturia's Sacred Tree. Obviously, Sacred Tree is a very important card in this deck, providing amazing deck efficiency and versatility. Sacred Tree is the principal card in which you use to get Glow Bulb on the field for either a synchro or defense, so that it'll end up in the graveyard, so that you use Glow Bulb's effect in the graveyard to help maximize efficiency of your synchro plays. It's the card you can use to help get Fruitfly on the field in combination with Inferno Reckless Summons at a much higher rate than you normally otherwise would. And in addition, its search effect is nice too, leaving your opponent with little choice to give you an advantage whenever it's destroyed. Lastly, I run 1 copy of Vanity's Emptiness as kind of a super breakthrough skill, forcing my opponent to basically use spells and traps to break the Fruitfly Armada. The idea behind Vanity's Emptiness is, if you've seen a lot of my other deck builds, I kind of stayed away from Emptiness because those builds rely so much on special summoning, and typically it kind of screws me over in the end more than it hurts my opponent. In this deck, you hang on to Vanity's Emptiness until you have a 2000 attack point Dragonfly, or when you get your 2 or 3 Fruitflies on the field, then you flip this over, and it really helps slow your opponent's ability to remove that from the field. Extra deck, I run 1 Star Eater, 1 Trishula Dragon of the Ice Barrier, 1 Stardust Spark Dragon, one Yazi, one Black Rose Dragon, one Goyo Guardian, one Naturia Barkion, one Armades, one Naturia Beast, one Herald of the Arclight. Arclight is really nice for this deck because it kind of acts as a monster version of Dark Bribe without the draw effect. And typically you're only going to put Arclight on the field when you have at least one or two fruit flies on the field. So that's going to lower your opponent's attack power, so it's going to make it difficult for them just to run over Arclight. Then we run the 4 rank 4 staples, Exciton Knight, number 101, Castel, XZ Dragon. And finally I run 1 copy of Gaga Cowboy to finish off the burn damage there at the end if needed. Finally, some may question the lack of back row removal. In my experience, the presence of Barkion, the Dark Bribes, and the ability of Fruitfly to remove monsters and then attack with those very monsters kind of force your opponent into a quandary of, do I use any back row on my own monsters, seem to handle a good portion of the threats. However, I do recommend you side deck some Mystic Space Typhoons just in case you run into a back row heavy deck. The general idea of this deck is to either quasi-stun the opponent using effects of like Mantis or stall with Dragonfly, Breakthrough Skill, Dark Bribe, or you focus around, and at the same time, you can do both, focus around using Fruitfly's effect and win via stealing the opponent's monsters, while also limiting your opponent's ability to attack because Fruitfly is going to drop their attack power to significantly low levels, if not 0. Glow Up Bulb is actually a rather critical card in this build because it can special summon itself from the graveyard once per duel, and then you can tribute it via Sacred Tree's effect for Fruitfly, so you can set up an Inferno Reckless summons a Fruitfly whenever you want, as long as Glow Up Bulb's in the graveyard, and you've got Inferno Reckless in your hand and a tree on the field. Some may question the lack of plant monsters in this deck and ask, well, it's going to limit some of your efficiency with Sacred Tree, and I can see that as a understandable concern, but overall in my experience running this deck, I haven't had a huge problem with running out of plant tributes or targets for Sacred Tree. The lack of Trap Tricks cards is due to a lack of deck space, as Pumpkin's special summoning ability is far superior in this type of build to any Trap Tricks monster. Overall, while this deck is certainly not Tier 1, it can take down a large number of Tier 2 decks with a respectable level of consistency. So if you want to take a stab at playing a Naturia archetype, I think this deck would serve you well. Well, that's my Naturia deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.